3 months from now, Kang Tae-jun will stand alone in an empty boardroom holding two things in his hands: a signed contract worth $200 million and a lopsided, hand-stitched leather bookmark that cost him nothing but 2 nights and a bleeding thumb. He will choose the bookmark. Right now, he doesn't even know the name of the woman who will make him choose it. Right now, he's about to spill scalding coffee across a stranger's lap and discover, for the first time in 38 years, that his money is worthless to the one person who actually matters. Rewind 3 months. The cafe on the corner of Itaewon's quiet side street smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon. Achieng Akinyi balanced 2 mugs on a tray, weaving between tables, when the door swung open too fast and a man in a tailored charcoal suit collided with her shoulder. The tray tipped. Coffee sailed through the air and landed across her blouse, her hands, and the leather bag slung over her chair. A bag holding 3 months of visa paperwork and her late father's letters. She gasped, more from the papers than the burn. "I'm so sorry, are you hurt?" The man's voice was clipped, distracted, already reaching into his jacket. He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled out a black card and set it on the counter like he was closing a business deal. "Replace everything. The bag, the clothes, whatever's ruined. Send the bill to my office." Achieng looked down at the card, then up at him. She didn't touch it. "I don't want your money." The words landed flat in the small cafe, and for a second the espresso machine's hiss was the only sound in the room. The man blinked, as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. His assistant, a sharp-shouldered man named Choi Eun-suk, stepped forward with the practiced outrage of someone paid to be offended on his boss's behalf. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? This is Kang Tae-jun. He owns half the buildings on this street. I know exactly who I'm talking to." Achieng wiped coffee from her wrist with a napkin, unhurried. "A man who thinks every mistake has a price tag."
Tae-jun ist Zeitend.
Nobody had spoken to him like that since his father died. Not his board, not his exes, not the reporters who circled his company like gulls. He opened his mouth to say something sharp back, and found he had nothing. "Keep your card," Achieng said, gentler now, sliding it back across the counter with 2 fingers. "My bag is ruined either way. Money won't unruin it." She turned and walked toward the back room to check on her papers, leaving him standing there in a stain of coffee and silence, his black card untouched on the counter like a rejected apology. He left without saying another word. His driver asked where to next, and Tae-jun realized he'd already forgotten the meeting he'd been rushing to. He kept replaying her voice. Not the insult in it, the total absence of interest. In 38 years, everyone had wanted something from him. She had wanted him gone. Welcome to Story Nest Tales. If you're new here, kindly like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Then stay with us, because this story is about to get a lot more complicated. To understand why one refused card could undo a man like Tae-jun, you have to understand the 2 lives already colliding. By 6 the next morning, Tae-jun was 30 floors above Seoul, standing at a window with a coffee he wouldn't finish, watching his empire wake up beneath him. Hanwoo Group ran shipping ports, 5-star hotels, a growing tech division, and enough real estate to reshape entire neighborhoods. His father had built the first third of it with his bare hands and the last 2/3 with fear. Tae-jun inherited both the empire and the method. At the office, 12 people stood when he entered a room. Nobody sat until he did. That morning a new hire, an eager junior manager named On, forgot the rule for half a second too long. Scrambling upright so fast he knocked over his own coffee across his tie. Tae-jun didn't slow down, didn't glance at him, just kept walking toward his office. By the time he sat down, 3 separate messages about it had already landed in a company group chat titled, "Without irony, do not sit slow." His assistant kept a running list of things Tae-jun disliked. Certain fonts, certain colors of tie, certain restaurants, so that no one would ever accidentally offend him twice. At lunch, his executive team ordered whatever he ordered, agreed with whatever he proposed, and laughed exactly on cue. He ate alone that night too, in a penthouse with a view worth more than most people's houses. A private chef's 7-course meal going lukewarm in front of him, while he scrolled through emails that all wanted something. His phone held 400 contacts and, if he was honest with himself, Not one person who would call just to ask how his day was. Across the river, Achieng's apartment was one room with a mattress on a frame she'd built herself, a photograph of her mother taped above the stove, and a golden retriever named Keto curled on a rug too small for him. She microwaved leftover jollof rice, called her mother in Nairobi while she ate, and promised, as she did every week, that the money she'd sent would cover her younger brother's school fees. "You work too hard, Achieng," her mother said through the crackling line. "The tuition installment is due in 3 weeks. If it's tight this month, don't force it. We'll manage." "It's not tight, Mama. I already sent it." It was tight. She'd covered the gap by picking up 2 extra closing shifts and skipping her own lunch twice that week. And she didn't mention either fact. "I like my life, Mama." And she meant it, even with the numbers stretched thin. She had the café, regulars who knew her by name, a Tuesday shift at the community center teaching English to newly arrived immigrant families, and Keto waiting by the door every evening like she was the only person on earth. She wasn't rich. She had never once needed to be. She'd only ever needed enough, and most weeks, enough was exactly what she had. 2 days after the coffee incident, Tae-jun told his assistant to find out who she was. The file that came back frustrated him more than it satisfied him. Kenyan, 29, no wealthy relatives, no history of pursuing wealthy men, no debts anyone could quietly buy up as leverage, no scandal to exploit, no ambition that money could redirect. She volunteered twice a week. She sent most of her income home. There was nothing in the file he could use, no lever, no weakness, no price. He had never met a person who couldn't be approached through status. It unsettled him the way a locked door unsettles a man who has only ever owned keys. "There has to be something," he told Choi, tapping the folder like it had personally failed him. "Everyone wants something. Maybe she just doesn't want anything from you." "Sir?" Choi said carefully, and immediately regretted saying it out loud when Tae-jun's eyes snapped up. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to him in that office in months, and it stung precisely because it was true. So he went back to the café himself. He ordered black coffee, sat at the corner table, and waited for special treatment that never came. Achieng brought his order the same way she brought everyone's, quick, warm, impersonal. When he tried to ask her questions, she answered in single sentences and moved to the next table. "Why won't you talk to me?" he finally asked on his 3rd visit, when the café had emptied out. She wiped down the counter without looking up. "If you want to know me, come here as a customer, not as a billionaire." That single line followed him home. He'd spent his whole life being the billionaire everywhere he went, in boardrooms, in restaurants, in his own family. He didn't know what it meant to walk into a room as anything else. He tried a different approach a week later. An invitation to Seoul's most exclusive restaurant, the kind with a 2-year waiting list and a Michelin star pinned to the door like a medal. Achieng surprised him by accepting. She was curious, she admitted, about the man who kept coming back after being told no. The dinner started well. Candles, a view of the skyline, a wine list longer than a novel. But halfway through the 2nd course, Achieng noticed the restaurant manager snap his fingers at a young waiter who dropped a fork, ordering him to apologize to the table in front of everyone. The boy's hands shook as he picked it up. Achieng set down her fork. "Can you ask him to stop doing that?"
Tae-jun blinked.
"Doing what?" "Humiliating that boy in front of a room full of people who won't remember his face tomorrow." Tae-jun glanced over, genuinely confused. He hadn't even registered the exchange. To him, staff were furniture that occasionally spoke. "It's not our table's problem. A beautiful restaurant isn't beautiful if the people working inside it are treated like they don't matter," Achieng said, standing, folding her napkin with a precision that felt like punctuation. "Thank you for dinner. I'm going to walk home." She left. Tae-jun sat alone at a table for 2, a bottle of wine he no longer wanted, and a bill he could pay without blinking. And for the first time in his adult life, his money could not make a single person stay in the room with him. Heartsuit. He kept coming back to the café anyway. Not with gifts. Not with reservations. Just himself, in a suit that got slightly less pressed each visit, ordering the same bitter black coffee that Achieng eventually teased him for. "You've been ordering the worst coffee on the menu for 2 weeks," she said one afternoon, sliding a different cup toward him. Cinnamon, a little sweet. Try this instead. On the house. It was the first thing she'd ever given him without being asked. He started noticing things he'd never had reason to notice. The elderly man who came every morning at 7 and counted his coins slowly. The university student who ordered nothing but sat in the corner studying because the café was warmer than her apartment. The way Achieng slid a free pastry across the counter to that student without ever mentioning it. He watched her comfort a new employee who'd burned an entire batch of pastries. Watched her drop to one knee to talk to a crying toddler at eye level instead of over him. Why do you do all this? Tae-jun asked one evening after closing, when it was just the two of them stacking chairs. Because someone did it for me once, Achieng said simply. When my father died, a neighbor paid our rent for 6 months without telling anyone. I didn't even know until years later. I just knew we never went hungry that winter. She shrugged. I try to be that for someone else now. That was the night he met Keto. The dog took one look at Tae-jun's $5,000 suit and treated it like an act of war, growling low from behind Achieng's legs. Tae-jun, mildly offended, produced an outrageously expensive bag of imported dog treats he'd apparently bought that afternoon. Keto sniffed them once and walked away. You can't buy a dog's love. Tae-jun? Achieng laughed. The first time she'd used his name without the weight of sarcasm behind it. Eventually, against every instinct he had, Tae-jun sat down on the cafe floor in his tailored trousers. He held out an empty palm instead of a treat. Keto approached, suspicious, sniffed his fingers, and, after a long pause that felt oddly like a verdict, rested his head in Tae-jun's lap. Tae-jun laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that surprised him coming out of his own mouth. His suit was covered in dog hair and dust from the floor, and he didn't care. Achieng watched him from behind the counter, and for the first time, she saw someone different sitting in front of her. It was a few nights later, walking Achieng home under streetlights that flickered against the wet pavement, that Tae-jun told her about his father, how every birthday gift growing up had been expensive and every conversation had circled back to grades, rankings, acquisitions, how his father used to say love was inefficient, that respect was the only currency that mattered because respect couldn't be taken from you the way affection could. I don't remember the last time someone asked if I was happy, Tae-jun admitted, staring at the pavement instead of at her. Not if the quarterly numbers were good. If I was happy. Achieng didn't pity him. Pity wasn't in her, not for a man with his resources. But something in her softened. Maybe you learned how to become valuable before you learned how to be human. The words hit him harder than anything his board had ever said in a hostile shareholder meeting. He asked about her father in return, and she told him about growing up in Kibera, about her mother selling vegetables to keep 3 children fed, about learning at 11 years old that community wasn't a nice idea, it was survival. You protected yourself by becoming powerful, she said. I protected myself by becoming useful to other people. Different roads. Same reason. Weeks passed, and something between them shifted from curiosity into something neither of them said out loud yet. Achieng was organizing a weekend program at the community center. English classes, job coaching, a small food pantry for immigrant families struggling to get on their feet. The funding had fallen through. Tae-jun's first instinct, old and automatic, was to quietly wire the entire budget himself and disappear before anyone noticed. He stopped himself. He thought about the restaurant, the black card, the word no that had rearranged something in him. Instead, he showed up at the center and asked, "What do you actually need? Not what would impress you. What do you need?" Achieng looked at him for a long moment, like she was recalculating something. 16 folding tables, a working printer, and someone who can teach a resume workshop without talking down to people. He got the tables delivered by Friday. He didn't put his name on the donation. And on Saturday, in a rumpled sweater instead of a suit, Kang Tae-jun stood in front of 40 strangers and taught a resume workshop himself, badly at first, then better, cracking a joke that actually landed by the second hour. Achieng watched from the back of the room, arms crossed, trying and failing to hide a smile. That same week, back at Hanwoo Group, a junior accountant named Park Ji-woo filed an internal report about falsified numbers in the construction division, kickbacks routed through shell contractors, invoices padded to disguise where the money was really going. Director Han Sung-woo, the board's longest-serving member and the man who'd sat at his father's right hand for 2 decades, was the loudest voice demanding Ji-woo be terminated before the story could leak. Some numbers are better left unread, Chairman, Han said, sliding the termination letter across the table like it was already signed. Protect the company. Protect your father's name. The old Tae-jun would have signed it without reading past the first paragraph. Trusting a man who used to ruffle his hair at company holiday parties, who'd never once given him a reason to look twice. Instead, Tae-jun called Ji-woo into his office personally. You could lose your job for coming forward, Tae-jun said. Why did you do it anyway? Ji-woo, visibly bracing for the worst, said, because someone had to, sir, even if it cost me. Tae-jun sat with that for a long moment. Then he ordered a full independent audit, protected Ji-woo's position in writing, and told the board the investigation would proceed with or without their approval. His executives exchanged glances across the table they'd never dared exchange before. Choi Eun-suk, watching his boss from the doorway afterward, murmured to himself, he's actually changing. But change, it turned out, had a price nobody had warned Tae-jun about, and it was about to land directly on Achieng's doorstep. 3 weeks later, a notice appeared taped to the window of every shop on Achieng Street. A redevelopment proposal, luxury towers, 24 months to vacate. The Morning Dew Café was on the list. So was the community center. So was the old bookstore where the university student did her homework in winter. Achieng's stomach dropped when she read the developer's name at the bottom of the notice. Hanwoo Group. She stood on the sidewalk holding the paper so long that Kido started pulling at his leash, confused by how still she'd gone. She called Tae-jun that night, voice tight. Did you know about this? There was a pause on the line, too long in her mind, though it was really only a second. Know about what? Your company. The redevelopment. My street. My cafe. Her voice cracked on the last word. Did you? No. No. Achieng, I didn't, I swear I. It doesn't matter whether you knew, she said, and hung up. Now stay with us. Because what Tae-jun does in the next 10 minutes will decide whether this story ends in heartbreak or something he's never chosen before. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because you do not want to miss what happens next. Tae-jun arrived at the emergency board meeting the next morning already furious, and what he found there made it worse. The redevelopment had been pushed hard by director Han Sung-woo, a board veteran who'd worked under Tae-jun's father for 20 years and had never fully hidden his contempt for the soft version of Tae-jun that had emerged in recent months. The version that protected whistleblowers instead of burying them, that funded folding tables instead of billboards. Your father would have signed this in 5 minutes, Han said flatly, sliding the projected profit numbers across the table. This isn't sentiment, Tae-jun. This is business. The neighborhood is underdeveloped. We triple our margins in 3 years. That neighborhood has a name, Director Han. It's not a line item. It's 12 acres and a very generous tax incentive. Han shot back, not missing a beat. Sentiment doesn't build shareholder value. Your father understood that better than anyone in this room. I'm starting to wonder if you still do. The comparison to his father landed exactly where Han intended it to. A blade slipped between old ribs, and for a moment the whole table went quiet, waiting to see which version of Kang Tae-jun would answer it at Heartsuit. Every instinct in Tae-jun screamed to fix this the old way, buy the building outright, override the board, make the problem disappear with a signature and a check. He almost did exactly that. He drafted the offer to purchase the café's lease directly, in his own name, before he'd even left the building. He showed up at Achieng's apartment that evening with the offer in hand. I'll buy the building. I'll buy the whole block if I have to. No one touches your café. Achieng's face didn't soften the way he expected. It hardened. That's exactly what I'm talking about, she said. You don't even realize you're doing it anymore. Whenever something hurts, you reach for money. You didn't ask me what I needed. You didn't ask the other shop owners what they needed. You just decided, again, that you know best because you can afford to. I'm trying to help. You're trying to control the outcome so it feels finished, she said, quieter now, which somehow landed harder than shouting would have. Not everything is yours to fix, Tae-jun. Not everything is yours to own. He stood in her doorway with an offer worth millions in his hand, and for the second time since they'd met, his money could not make her stay in the room with him. She closed the door gently, which was somehow worse than a slam. He went back to his penthouse and didn't turn on the lights. For 4 days they didn't speak. Tae-jun sat through board meetings hearing Han's voice and Achieng's voice arguing in his head at the same time. One telling him to protect the prophet. One telling him he'd learned nothing at all. Then Ji-woo, the young accountant Tae-jun had protected weeks earlier, quietly requested a meeting. He'd cross-referenced the redevelopment contracts with the earlier fraud investigation and found something Han had buried. The shell contractors from the kickback scheme were the same companies bidding to build the new towers. Han wasn't just chasing profit. He was cleaning his own fraud through a project that would demolish an entire community to erase the paper trail. Tae-jun sat with the documents for a long time. He thought about his father, who would have used this leverage to destroy Han publicly, loudly, as a demonstration of power. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be instead. He called an emergency session. Han was still talking about triple margins when Tae-jun slid a single folder across the table and said nothing at all. Han opened it. His face held its practiced stillness for almost 10 seconds, the composure of a man who'd survived 2 decades of boardrooms, and then it didn't. "Where did you get this?" "Ji-woo is very thorough," Tae-jun said quietly. "You have 2 choices, Director Han. Resign tonight and cooperate fully with the audit. Or I hand this to the prosecutor's office at 9 tomorrow morning, and the board can watch you explain shell contractors to a courtroom instead of a shareholder call." "Your father would have buried this," Han said, and for the first time in 20 years his voice wasn't steady. "To protect the company. My father would have buried it to protect you." Tae-jun didn't raise his voice. "I'm not my father." Han looked at him for a long moment. The same man who used to ruffle his hair as a boy, who had taught him how to tie a tie before his father ever did. Then closed the folder, stood, and left without another word. He resigned before midnight. Then Tae-jun rewrote the redevelopment plan from the ground up. No towers. Renovated storefronts instead of demolished ones. The café, the bookstore, the community center, all preserved, all improved, all still owned by the people who'd built them. The project would earn a fraction of what Han's version would have made. Tae-jun signed off on the loss without hesitation, and made sure his name appeared nowhere on the public announcement. He didn't call Achieng to tell her. He didn't want credit. He wanted, for once, to do the right thing simply because it was right, not because it might win someone back. It took Achieng 2 weeks to piece together what had actually happened, from a tearful phone call with the bookstore owner who just received the revised plans. She showed up at Tae-jun's office that afternoon, past his stunned assistant, straight into the glass-walled room where he was reviewing quarterly reports alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, breathless from the elevator, from disbelief, from something gentler underneath both. Tae-jun set down his pen. "Because if I told you, you might think I did it for you." He paused, choosing the next words carefully, the way he'd started choosing most words around her now. "I did it because it was right. You just happened to be the reason I finally understood what right looks like." Achieng stood very still in the doorway of an office that could have belonged to anyone cold and untouchable, and realized the man behind the desk wasn't that man anymore. He wanted to apologize properly for the offer he'd shoved at her doorstep, the reflex to buy his way out of guilt instead of earning his way back. He thought about flowers. He thought about jewelry. He thought about the exclusive restaurant with the 2-year waiting list. He bought none of it. Instead, over 2 clumsy evenings, Tae-jun taught himself to fold and stitch a leather bookmark by hand. Badly, the edges uneven, one corner slightly crooked. His fingers pricked twice by the needle he'd never used before. On the inside flap, in handwriting nowhere near as polished as his signature on a billion-dollar contract, he wrote, "You taught me that having everything isn't the same as having something that matters." He gave it to her at the café, during closing, chairs half-stacked around them. Achieng turned it over in her hands, tracing the uneven stitching, and her eyes filled before she could stop them. Not because it was valuable, because it wasn't, because for the first time, he'd given her something money couldn't have bought no matter how much of it he had. She accepted it. And then she accepted him. Months later, The towers Han had wanted to build were nothing but an old memo in a filing cabinet nobody opened anymore. Kang Tae-jun was still one of the wealthiest men in South Korea. His company still ran ports and hotels and a growing tech division. Nothing about his bank account had changed. Everything about him had. He ate lunch with his employees now at the same table, no one waiting for him to sit first. He listened more than he spoke in meetings. He apologized out loud when he was wrong, which still happened more than he liked to admit. He funded 3 more community programs across the city and made sure his name was on none of them. Most evenings, he still walked into the morning dew café, and he still ordered something other than his old bitter black coffee. Cinnamon now, a little sweet, the way she'd first served it to him. "You finally learned," Achieng said one evening, sliding the cup across the counter. Kido asleep across both their feet like he'd claimed the space as his own territory. "No," Tae-jun said, smiling in a way his father never once had. "I'm still learning." Kido chose that exact moment to leap up and plant 2 muddy paws on Tae-jun's $5,000 coat, and Achieng laughed so hard she had to hold the counter for balance. Tae-jun looked down at the ruined coat, and for the first time in his life, he laughed at something money couldn't fix instead of reaching for a card to fix it. Because the man who once believed a black card could solve any problem had finally found the one thing it never could have bought him. A place where he didn't have to be a billionaire to belong. If this story reminded you that genuine connection is worth more than any amount of money, tell us in the comments. Would you have returned that black card the way Achieng did? Like this video if Tae-jun's transformation moved you, and subscribe to Story Nest Tales, because our next story of love, sacrifice, and unexpected redemption is coming very soon.